start over on that one topic. So this is April 7th, um, which is my father's birthday. Um, a couple weeks ago, or a week ago or so, Anna had asked about advising in the department, and that led me to find out about it and agree to advise her. So I have now been authorized to be an advisor and trained on the DegreeWorks system. So if you don't have an advisor, I'll be happy to do that for you. Just email me and let me know. Also, as a result of that, the department's getting a little more organized, so you should actually receive some information from the department about it. Um, and I apologize. I think one of the reasons why it got disorganized was the online advisor or the online bachelor's degree in professional and technical writing was being advised by Heidi Harris. And then Heidi Harris this year became the graduate coordinator. And so they just hadn't really thought through the um, ramifications of that because she really can't also advise all the bachelor's degree, and that's really why. So we want to be helpful to you guys. Um, any questions about anything?
Yeah, I've got a quick one.
Mm-hmm.
The the uh, the revision that's due coming up, is that gonna need to include a revision for style
Um,
whenever it's due?
you probably should think about it, but I'm not going to have
Yeah,
a specific blog that says pay attention to that.
yeah.
Um, so why don't I share the screen and focus on the calendar. So I know it's been a little bit confusing all through the semester. I mean, the overall plan was that you sort of practice these concepts in an opinion piece, and then as we move on in a rhetorical analysis of somebody else's piece of rhetoric. And at this point, what I want you to do is to pick one of those two and make it the absolute best that you can, and submit it, and then I'll be grading it as a project itself, as opposed to the application of these specific things. So that is due at the end of next week, um, on Sunday, April 18th.
Yeah.
And, and so that's why there isn't anything here in the work, what you should be working on right now, because that's what you should be working on right now is picking which one of those two things you should be doing, and make it the best you can. It doesn't mean you have to cover every single concept that we dealt with. So if you're doing the rhetorical analysis, it may not be appropriate to talk about the enthymemes in whatever thing you're doing. Um, it may be more appropriate to focus on structure or style or um, any of the other kinds of things that we've been talking about. Throughout the text, there is suggestions if you wanted to do a style focused analysis or an argument focused analysis or a kairos and rhetorical situation focused analysis. So you could do one that just focused on one of the concepts if you wanted, or you can do it on many or all. It really depends on the particular thing that you're trying to do. Um, the same thing about the persuasion piece. it may not have been real helpful for you to focus on um, structure with that piece, although probably was. Um, so there's a difference between these blog things that I've been asking you to do, which is more of a practice and apply and just assume, let's see if what we could say if it's interesting. If there's something interesting we can find by thinking about these things. A lot of times you end up finding things that you didn't realize were interesting. But
Yeah, for
so
sure.
so I mean, but but there is a difference between the blogs, which are more practice, playground, sandbox kind of things, and this piece that I'm asking you to um, draft for Sunday, April 18th. Does that clarify?
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you.
Where are you? You look like you're in a hospital or something.
No, I'm at work. I'm
Oh,
actually in line to order at Wendy's, and then I'll be
oh, I see. It's Wendy's. Okay.
back to work.
um, does everybody get that? Any other questions about it?
That was actually really helpful because like I was like thinking about if NT memes would work as well for video games. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at this point, you've tried to think about everything, but your goal is to write the best paper that you could, or if you've chosen a different genre for the argument, the best argument you could. So, um, and what I'll be doing, so I'm asking you to turn in drafts on Sunday, April 18th. I will then divide everybody. That includes both people who are able to come in person and those people who are um, solely interacting asynchronously. I'll put you into groups and give you a strategy for peer review, and then the final version of that will be due Sunday, May 2nd, which is the day before the last day of classes.
Dr. Matson, sorry to interrupt you. I have to go get my car towed, so I will be back.
Okay, that's too bad.
Yeah, it won't start, so, and they just called me, so I will be right back.
Okay. So, with my little color coding, these are the last 3 weeks of the semester. This week, April 19th, will be the peer review and feedback week. I haven't quite decided the extent to which we'll be meeting um, because I'm not, we'll just, I haven't quite decided. And then I should also say, by the way, that on April 12th, I have to go out of town. I'm putting it in air quotes because I'm not really going to go out of town, but I'm supposed to be in Michigan at a professional activity, and it's all going to be by Zoom. But so I will probably make a pre-recorded class for that day. I haven't quite decided. Um, so I probably should say, whoops. Well, I'll do that afterwards. Can't do it right now without wrecking things. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, I will start talking some more about style. So we've already gone over this number one. Number two, so at the end of next week will be the quiz on style. And there's the schedule. And I'm just reminding everybody about the new plan for quizzes. There will be a question to answer that's part of the class discussion. And we are working on this canon of rhetoric called style. You know, in many ways, memory and delivery, especially when you start getting into different kind of media besides oral argument, especially delivery, it really gets at questions of style as well. So in looking at the quizzes, there were two questions that seemed to give people the biggest trouble. One was, what is qualitative progression? And it was just on the true false section. So qualitative progression is not having to do with quality. And that's somehow, and I mean, the statement was it has to do with evaluating. The word quality relates to evaluation when we talk about stasis. So the stasis of quality is the stasis of evaluating the quality of something. That is, you're arguing over how you judge something. And you know, I gave you the example last class about the stasis of definition about vaccine passports, and saying that it's an argument of definition, that some people define it as a government overreach and some people define it as you know, a sensible way to protect people. Those two definitions really have a evaluative component, and so a lot of times the definition and the evaluation are sort of two sides of the same coin. That is, if you define it in a certain way, you're implying that you don't like it, or that that it's a bad thing. And if you define it in a different way, you can imply that it's a good thing, especially when we have these two-sided debates like this. But to get back to structure, when we're talking about structure and qualitative progression, what we're talking about is something different. It has nothing to do with the evaluation or the quality of something. And it's interesting because I was researching this a little, and it's always defined, and it was from Kenneth Burke. And Kenneth Burke is a really great rhetorician, but he is complex, and he comes up with his own terms, and you know, many people find it off-putting because he comes up with his own terms, or he uses everyday terms in different ways. And so, you know, in this case, he is using the term quality or qualitative in his own kind of way. And usually, so there's two types of progressive structure. And by progressive structure, it's that you have a sense that one thing follows the next thing, that follows the next thing, that follows the next thing. So you have a real sense that it moves in a certain order. And this is something that, of course, in a written text, you're very likely to see, because written texts are linear, and also oral texts. Oral rhetoric is very linear. And so qualitative is often defined in the opposition to the other type of progressive. So there's two types of progressive, the syllogistic and the qualitative. And the syllogistic is more, like it says here on the screen, logical, consequential, or causal necessity, or a feeling of such necessities. That is, that each section that's being introduced, you feel like it's the consequence of the previous one, or you feel like it's set up in a very logical manner. Um, so I was trying to find an example of the opposite, the qualitative, and when I was looking at everything, it turns out just about every speech really is almost always syllogistic in its progression. You have this sense of a very logical kind of person going through. I think probably um, uh, Trump would be the one exception from that. And so I think Trump probably gives us a good example of a qualitative kind of structure. It's not that there's like a sense of, first I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about this, but it's more like he sort of circles in around a topic with sort of impressive things. And I want to make sure that I'm not implying that because Trump does it, it's worse or something, or it's worse, that I'm trying to criticize it because it's just a different way of approaching things. The qualitative, so the quote I have here, it depends on associative or emotional connections so that the introduction of one quality, mood, or set of associations evokes another. And then the example that Longacre and Walker gave was of a film that basically had images that were dark and gloomy and then gradually became light and bright and sort of more happy. And it was just kind of images and associations and etc. And they also pointed out that probably most written and oral, speech that is that we talk about in terms of rhetoric is going to be syllogistic because the linearity of the medium kind of forces a very logical kind of sense. But that with some other technologies, the technology itself may allow for other things. So video is linear, but because of visual stuff, it can kind of invoke things beyond more logical kinds of things. And, the visual can evoke emotional and visceral is a good term, sort of where you just, something just, it feels like something from the center of your core kind of thing.
I think almost of like art, like paintings or sculptures maybe, or would be
Yeah,
qualitative.
I forgot. I should have put that. I will go back and add that into the slideshow because the visual really words tend to be more logical, and visual tends to be more emotional, visceral kinds of things. That is a really good point. And the other thing I was thinking about is, we all talk about how we start going down the rabbit hole on the internet, and
Mm-hmm.
none of you have ever done that, right? um, or I don't know if you guys did this, but when I was younger, and I would spend, like hours talking to a friend, and then later we would track the order of our argument, or our discussion. Like we were talking about X, and then we started talking about Y, and then we started talking about Z, and we try to go back and try to understand how we went from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And it's rarely real logical. It's just kind of this qualitative, associative kind of process. Um, it seems to me kind of so the internet, because of its, I mean, it's definitely not any more linear, and it's visual and it's physical. You know, the internet calls on so many different parts of ourself, and unlike, say, a written text, which just calls on a more limited set of ourselves. Anyway, I think structure is different. And of course, the thing about the internet is you can access something in the middle, or who knows where you access it. And when people are designing, say, websites, they're constantly thinking about, what's the point at which people access this site, and how can they get to all the places they need to? And of course, it's not necessarily going to be linear. So the structure is a whole different kind of sense of structure. That actually gets at that idea of information architecture. So to go back, the one of the things that people seem to have trouble with was, what qualitative progression was. Either they mixed it up with the stasis of quality, or they just didn't really know what it was. But it's basically how you structure something, and in a more emotional, associative kind of way. And it may be less likely to be in traditional rhetorical arguments, because traditional rhetorical arguments in text or oral kind of lend themselves to the syllogistic instead. The other area people seem to be having trouble with was presence. And this is at the beginning of the chapter. I want to remind everybody, there's one more quiz. I mean, these are open book tests, and I'm trying to make sure that I only ask about something that I actually talk about in the class. But chances are you don't remember. I mean, I don't always remember. And so, go back and find it in the book and read it. A long time ago, I used to make the mistake of requiring students to buy books that I didn't really use. And that was just basically because that's what they did to me when I was coming up. But the books prices have gone up so high that I cannot order books. I refuse to order books if I'm not going to actually use them. So, and I think most faculty are of that mindset these days. So anyway, it's in the book. But what does these things mean? The choice between competing arguments will be determined by which premises exert the most energy in the audience consciousness. So Aristotle, the Longacre and Walker talk about Aristotle's example explaining presence. That is that there's a person and they're trying to decide whether to eat some candy or not. And so there's a competing argument, eat the candy or don't eat the candy. And, what happens to convince the person. And so the choice is the thing that exerts the most energy in this person choosing the candy, but I put in audience's consciousness. So it has something to do with energy. And Aristotle himself talked about energy. And then a modern rhetorician, Perlman, really was interested in argumentation. And he's actually another one who's interested in legal argumentation. So Perlman said, one argument or one set of premises has greater presence and therefore exerts more persuasive force. So he's saying that presence has to do with something that exerts more persuasive force. Of course, that still doesn't really tell us that much um, about what presence is. Um, and then the textbook, they say, they ask basically a question: how do the presentational aspects of rhetoric, structure and style? So that's the stuff that you see. So there's like a sense of a deep structure in any argument, and then there's the presentation of that argument. And what does the and the rhetor has all these choices of how to structure it, how to stylize it, what words to use. So the question is, how do the presentational aspects of rhetoric, structure, and style play a role in enhancing the energy or presence of ideas and arguments in the audience's thought? And really, I was thinking about it, this has to do with attention. That is, how does the rhetor focus the attention on the important things? So it's not just the attention between two competing arguments, but in a given argument, whether it's a song, whether it's a speech, whether it's a editorial, whether it's a video game, how does the attention get focused on? Which made me think about Death of a Salesman. And the famous line in Death of a Salesman, the salesman says, attention must be paid, attention must be paid. And, he's sort of a middle class everyman who nobody pays attention to. And so anyway, that's sent me down my own rabbit hole of seeing quotes about attention. And if you substitute the concept of attention for the concept of presence, maybe that will help in thinking about what presence in an argument means. But pay attention to your enemies, for they are the first to discover your mistakes. And I really pay attention to the bass in the music I listen to, and that's what I tend to write toward. And that's definitely a rhetorical thing. So, if he's tending to write towards the bass, he's trying to put presence in his music, which are pieces of rhetoric. Whatever you focus your attention on will become important to you, even if it's unimportant, which I love. You have to pay attention to the details to have success in the playoffs. You can't take anyone lightly. So the question, what are the details that you are trying to direct people to pay attention to? How can you make those details be more obvious? Attention is a precious commodity, which is an interesting thing. If you are asking people to pay attention to every single thing in your argument or piece of rhetoric, they get overwhelmed. They don't know where to pay attention. What's the main point that you're trying to get across? And so it's precious in the sense that we only have a limited amount of attention that we can pay. And so if you're a writer, you want to make sure that they pay attention to the really important stuff. And, all the principles you've learned about writing, making clear what your point is, or, including some kind of introduction, or bringing it all together at the end, or if you're doing more creative nonfiction, how do you, what do you choose to start with? What image, what event? I like this. Best way to get anybody's attention is dinner. I have good kitchen skills and good grocery shopping skills. It's back to attention is a limited resource, so pay attention to where you pay attention. And I think that's a really good thing to think about in terms of your audience. That is, they can only pay attention to a certain part. And, so how are you going to focus them on that? The And here's one that connects exactly with that energy idea. Attention is psychic energy, and like physical energy, unless we allocate some part of it to the task at hand, no work gets done. There's a name that I could not pronounce. The greatest gift you can give to another is the purity of your attention. And that also makes me think about the audience, and the audience as giving attention to a piece of rhetoric. So I'm hoping that gives people a better idea of what attention means. It relates to style, because all these things here are ways in which writers get you to pay attention to certain parts and not certain parts. So figures of speech and thought, or the rhythm, and we hear that all the time in great speech givers, orators. They get people to pay attention, and it creates more presence. And so, like, when they do these examples of great sections of inaugural speeches, like I shared at the very beginning of the semester, they're almost always examples of figures of speech and thought. So does that give you guys an idea about presence? Any questions more about presence? So I started talking about the virtues of style, and these are the four that they've talked about. And the fourth one is called, well, our textbook calls it distinctiveness. The classical people either called it ornament or urbanity. And our textbook didn't like ornament because that makes it sound more trivial, I think. Just something like you add on top, rather than something more embedded in the meaning that you're trying to do. And so they use the concept of distinctiveness, and I think that's a really useful parallel. So we started talking a little bit about figures of speech and figures of thought, by talking about metaphors, and I showed you the yogiism video. And I thought today we'd talk a little bit about two types of rhetorical figures. And one is parallelism, and one is anaphora. Notice that they include enthymeme as a rhetorical figure. I was sort of surprised at seeing that, but I guess it is if you present it, as opposed to it being sort of the deep structure of your argument. Remember on this Silva Rhetorica, they actually have these unbelievable number of figures along the right side, which is just overwhelming. But if you click on viewing options, they so they say the forest of rhetoric is crowded with flowers, that it is so crowded with flowers that it is sometimes better sampled selectively. So what rhetorical figure are they using there?
Metaphor?
Yeah, it's a, you know, in fact, this whole Silva Rhetorica is itself a metaphor. Um, it's the sort of forest of rhetoric. And the reason why they're calling it partly is because the way this is set up, it's definitely one of the it's designed so you can kind of go down the rabbit path of connecting from one term to the next term to the next term. But they have different ways of organizing them. And I thought this was an interesting one. By rhetorical strategy. So if you see here, so there's the rhetorical strategy of amplification, and these are all amplification ones. And then the rhetorical strategy of parallelism, and these are all, well, and this is, which is this. And so there's homopototon, zoigma, diazoigma, solipsis, isocolon, homeotutelon, climax, and ecresis tricolon. I like zugma. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. As Virgil guide Dante through Inferno, the Sibyl in. I think we'll look at another. Anyway, let's go back to here. So does everybody know what parallelism is? Have you guys heard of parallelism in other classes?
I feel like I've heard of it, but I'm a little bit I'm a little foggy on remembering what it meant.
Anybody else heard of it in another class? How about maybe in your tech writing or writing for work class? Or editing, if you've taken that? Well, parallelism is a way of structuring a sentence, often of lists, in a parallel way with some kind of repetition. And it is not a correctness issue. It is a style issue, but it really helps your writing a lot. And like in technical writing, where you have headings and bullet points a lot of times, thinking about parallels really helps because it makes reading more easy. So that if you have, actually this one has a more basic one. Nope. Where is the, oh, Silva Rhetorica. Whoops. So they have just basic examples of parallelism. She tried to make her pastry fluffy, sweet, and delicate. In this list of descriptions about her pastry, we have 3 items that are listed and they're in a parallel form. What is the grammatical form of fluffy, sweet, and delicate? The part of speech is the question I'm asking.
Well, they're all adjectives.
Yeah, they're all adjectives. And now you could write it in a different way so that you got the meaning of part, but you know, she tried to make her fluffy, her pastry fluffy, um, with lots of sugar and um, looking like it was delicate. And, you know, that's grammatically correct, but when you have it in, you know, exactly parallel forms, in this case, 3 adjectives, um, then um, it's more memorable, it's easier to process, and you might be able to pay more attention to it if it was important to pay attention. Singing a song or writing a poem is joyous. What is the parallelism here? Somebody besides Anna? Where's the parallel form here? Hello?
I'm here. I didn't hear. I wasn't paying close attention though. I'm sorry.
What is the parallel form in singing a song or writing a poem is joyous? Well, where's the repetition?
Well, they're both like forms of self-expression.
Yeah, I'm asked. This is a grammatical question.
It's
Oh,
isn't a gerund like singing a song, writing a poem?
Right. So they both have. So this is a conjunction, a list or 2 items, coordinated thing. And you could say to sing a song or writing a poem is joyous. You could say that, it would be grammatical, but it doesn't sound as good at all. It sounds much better if you use the same verb form to describe each of these things. So, singing a song, which is an ing form, you don't really need to know what they're actually called um, to do this. You can do it just by ear. So, I mean, both of these are ing forms of the verb, and they happen to be gerunds because they're functioning as a noun. So, X is joyous. So this is the noun phrase. Um, this parallelism of clauses um, has 4 clauses listed, and again, what's being repeated? What does each clause have? Aaliyah? Morgan? Don't hide.
I don't know, adjectives?
Well, I mean, perch are inexpensive. It's cod are cheap, trout are abundant, but salmon are best. Each clause, that's the whole phrase, the whole sentence that's jinked by these semicolons. What does each one have?
R.
They each have R, and they each start with the name of a fish, and then have an adjective describing that fish. So,
Yeah.
I mean, they are quite repetitive. Perch, fish one is inexpensive, fish two is cheap, fish three is abundant, but salmon are best. So, these are examples of parallelism in just everyday speaking. So, let's look at parallelism in famous rhetorical things. So they describe it as a figure of balance identified by a similarity in the syntactical structure of a set of words in successive phrases, clauses, sentences, successive words, phrases, clauses. I think there was a typo there. Successive phrases, clauses, sentences with the same or very similar grammatical structure. This figure often occurs in public address with others, such as antithesis, anaphor, synonym. They definitely need to edit. Okay, so here are the examples. First of all, there was a very famous parallelism in the Gettysburg Address that we listened to a while back. You know, he ends with, let's make a country that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. So that's an example of parallelism. Those three items are each prepositional phrases, and in fact they end with the people, and the parallelism is the three different prepositions, and that makes it more energized, to use the presence idea, and it's easier to pay attention to it. So here,
that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
so we have verb phrases here. And not only are they verb phrases, but they're all in the exact same format, which is a verb and then any and then the noun. It makes it more memorable.
I've tried to offer leadership to the Democratic Party and the nation. If in my high moments I have done some good, offered some service, shed some light, healed some wounds, rekindled some hope, or stirred some runs of apathy and indifference, or in any way along the way helped somebody, then this campaign has not been in vain.
So again, we have a list, and it's in exactly the same format. In this case, what he's done, and each one of these phrases starts with a verb, then has some, and then has something else.
We have seen the state of our union in the endurance of rescuers working past exhaustion. We've seen the unfurling of flags, the lighting of candles, the giving of blood, the saying of prayers in English, Hebrew, and Arabic.
So again, those things, unfurling of flags, lighting of candles, giving of blood, saying of prayers, could be said in other ways, but by linking them together in a parallel structure, it brings attention. Oh, here's our Gettysburg Address.
This nation, under God,
shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
And one of the things I think you have, you can see that happens here is it sort of builds with this piling on of parallel structure. And that's a real common um, thing in all of these. Is sort of a piling on. All of these are examples of sort of listing all these different things, sort of building up, like music would make you, but in this case, text.
The island of 1963, one of the youngest of nations and the oldest of civilizations, has discovered that the achievement of nationhood is not an end but a beginning. In the years since independence, you have undergone a new and peaceful revolution, an economic and industrial revolution, transforming the face of this land while still holding to the old spiritual and cultural values. You have modernized your economy, harnessed your rivers, diversified your industry, liberalized your trade, electrified your farms, accelerated your rate of growth, and improved the living standard of your people.
I'm going to skip to this one.
More than any time in recent history, America.
So this is President Josiah Bartlett from West Wing, which is no longer on, but I hope people have had a chance to
Destiny
see.
is not of our own choosing. We did not seek, nor did we provoke an assault on our freedom and our way of life. We did not expect, nor did we invite a confrontation with evil. Yet the true measure of a people's strength is how they rise to master that moment when it does arrive. But every time we think we've measured our capacity to meet a challenge, we look up and we're reminded that that capacity may well be limitless. This is a time for American heroes. We will do what is hard. We will achieve what is great.
So that's the one that I think is particularly helpful. It just has this kind of parallelism that sort of gives it a meaningfulness. I think in this case, the music kind of got in the way. Do these examples help you see what parallelism is?
Yeah.
So you will see a lot of it in I've got a there we go. And now, so parallelism is not only for high levels of rhetoric, but as I was saying before, it's a very important style strategy for very practical technical writing. Because, for example, one of the most common places that you'll see parallelism is a resume. So you've got all this lists of things in your resume. It will be much cleaner if each item in the list is following the same grammatical pattern. And in technical writing, you often have headings. And so it will have a lot more, it's just easier to access and process if each heading clearly follows the same structure. So you'll often see in some larger document that has multiple headings that they'll all start with gerunds, and so they'll all describe that. I find myself, when I do headings in various lecture type material, I will try to use parallel structures to make it clear how each section is about different things. So the other one I want to look at is anaphora, which is a type of parallelism. And basically, it has additional parallelism that is in the beginning.
That my heart has been troubled, that I have not sought this nomination, that I could not seek it in good conscience, that I would not seek it in honest self-appraisal, is not to say that I value it the less. Rather, it is that I revere the office of the presidency of the United States.
This is radical feminism. The agenda that Clinton and Clinton would impose on America. Abortion on demand, a litmus test for the Supreme Court, homosexual rights, discrimination against religious schools, women in combat units. That's change, all right. But that's not the kind of change America needs. It's not the kind of change America wants. And it's not the kind of change we can abide in a nation we still call God's country.
So and I cut off the cheer after, but you can definitely see how this parallelism is a building, and that repetition promotes that.
To raise a happy, healthy, and hopeful child, it takes a family. It takes teachers. It takes clergy. It takes business people. It takes community leaders. It takes those who protect our health and safety. It takes all of us.
And notice that she gets slower as she says those things to create emphasis, to create presence, so that she is leading to this point. You know, it takes a village. It takes all of us. And so she's trying to give more presence, attention with her style.
The Republicans believe that the wagon train will not make it to the frontier unless some of the old, some of the young, some of the weak are left behind by the side of the trail.
That's the current Cuomo's father.
We are a people in a quandary about the present. We are a people in search of our future. We are a people in search of a national community. We are a people trying not only to solve the problems of the present, unemployment, inflation.
What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another. Feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
So, what I would like to do is talk a little bit about a commonplace book. This was something that probably starting in the Middle Ages, but very much important in the 18th, 19th century. Students were encouraged, or any speaker really, was encouraged to develop a commonplace book. That is a book that you would, if you read or hear something that you really like, you just write it down. And then you might try doing it yourself, sort of imitating that same kind of style. And so I'd like to ask you all to construct an anaphora after one of these two as models. So the Hillary Rodham Clinton one was, to be a good student, it takes blah blah. To be a good parent, it takes this, it takes this, it takes this. So I'd like you to, you don't have to pick student, it could be anything, but to be a good X, it takes blah, blah, blah. Just sit there and try it. Or um, try the Kennedy one. Actually, you could try, or the Barbara Jordan too, but Kennedy one was what we need in America is not X. What we need in America is not Y. What we need in America is not Z. And so what we need in Little Rock is not blah, blah, blah. What we need in this class is not blah, blah, blah. Just use the structure, but fill in the content according to what you like. And those two seem like they'd be sensible. The Barbara Jordan one would also be sensible. If I can find it again. Yeah. So Kennedy's was what we need in the United States is not this. What we need is not that. Barbara Jordan did we are a people in quandary. We are a people in search of our future. So, and then Hillary Clinton said, to raise a happy, healthy, hopeful child, it takes a family. So what I'm asking you to do is replace the key terms with whatever you want and try this pattern. So I would like you to do that right now and see if you could share it in the chat. Just pick one.
You want us to replace the words?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
actually, you could keep the. I mean, you could do your own. To raise a happy child, you could do your own, or to be a good student, it takes blah blah blah. Or what we need in the United States, you could come up with your own list of what we need, what we do not need, or you could come up with your own list of what we need in some other context.
I tried.
Does that make sense? So in order for me to see the chat, oh wait, I know, that's how we do it. So Morgan, I'm sorry I didn't have the chat, so your earlier question. To be a good student, it takes dedication. To be a good student, it takes hard work. To be a good student, good. Anybody else? Yeah. And maybe it takes something else like creativity or whatever. So the idea behind these, to be a good neighbor, oh yeah. And it's best if it kind of moves to a sort of a peak of some kind. A few weeks ago, I played a video about the music background, and a lot of these figures of speech are ways of getting that same kind of build up or attitude as um, uh, music background will do. Another good one to practice with might be um, um, Chiaroscuro. I'm not sure I pronounced that right, which is the figure of speech that Kennedy used. Ask not what you can do for your country. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, which means crisscross. So that's how the sentence um, uh, is a crisscross. So ask not what somebody else can do for you, and then ask what you can do for somebody else. That would be a good pattern to practice with for different things. So you can see how um, this kind of practicing these patterns might help you sort of develop your rhetorical fluency, make it easier, for you to come up with things like that. Questions about what I was asking you to do? So I definitely encourage you to look through all those lists and, find a few that seem kind of neat and, try practicing them yourself. So today, one last thing I wanted to talk about, if I can get rid of the picture, is another one of the virtues of style, which is decorum. Now, decorum is one of those terms that in our everyday use of language kind of sounds very limited. We tend to use it more for, are you, just following the P's and Q's and sort of a very limited sense of fitting in. And we think of it as kind of fussy. If you're going to have a tea party, you have to have the proper decorum. If you're going to be invited to the president's, to the White House for a meeting, you have to learn what the proper decorum is. But the classical Greeks thought of decorum as a much broader category. That is, of any time, the appropriateness of fit of something to the context. And whenever you you hear somebody and you think that just doesn't sound like right to hear here, we're talking about decorum. And I thought I'd end with a video from the Argue Lab about decorum.
Poor Kendall Jenner. She gets to be in this awesome Pepsi commercial where she gets to be a supermodel and then march in the streets against the man, whoever the man is, and she gets to drink a Pepsi and then give it to a cop, and she ends up getting mocked for it.
Okay, well, bye, Chloe. I gotta go. I'm on the set of my Pepsi commercial. I stopped the police from shooting black people by handing them a Pepsi. I know, it's cute, right?
All the mean and nasty pundits said, sort of tone deaf. But from a rhetorical standpoint, the commercial wasn't so much tone deaf as indecorous. It violated the rules of decorum. Now, decorum is Latin for fitness or fitting in. It's not so much a matter of tea drinking politeness and following all the rules. That could follow the rules of decorum if you are drinking with elderly English ladies. But in most cases, decorum simply means fitting in with your environment in the same way that a species survives in its environment by fitting in appropriately. And that's where the commercial goes wrong. In my book, Thank You for Arguing, I quote the modern rhetorician and genius Kenneth Burke, who wrote in 1950 that decorum was the single most effective form of persuasion. Now, he said that while talking about the types of decorous skills, the skills of decorum you should have. He writes, "You persuade a man only insofar as you can talk his language by speech, gesture, tonality, order, image, attitude, idea, identifying your ways with his." Now, he did write that in 1950. Today, calling all of humanity as man would seem indecorous. Not back then. Basically, he's talking here about values, about what we most value and think is most important, what we most identify with. And here's where the Pepsi commercial with poor Kendall Jenner went wrong. The Pepsi generation Pepsi is going after today values more than anything else not having their values bought and sold by the corporate world. This is a generation all about authenticity, not money-making phoniness. She gives a policeman a Pepsi, and everybody cheers, essentially, not Kendall Jenner, but the Pepsi. Now, this is a very different ad, and I think it's a little bit of a throwback, but in a wrong way, to the famous Mean Joe Green Coke commercial.
Mr. Green? Mr. Green?
Yeah.
You need any help? I just want you to know, I think you're the best ever.
Yeah, sure.
Want my Coke? It's okay, you can have it.
Now, the difference between Mean Joe Green and Kendall Jenner here is that the Coke serves as an act of kindness. In the Pepsi commercial, Kendall Jenner is giving the Pepsi to a cop as if it's a form of protest in itself. It's not an act of kindness at all. It's like doing something to someone else and getting cheered for it. That you don't get more crassly commercial than that. And that's, I think, why the commercial was considered tone deaf and therefore mocked. If you want to practice ideal decorum, understand what your audience values the most, and then prove that you value them too. Now, this does not mean dressing like your audience or trying to behave like an audience. I'm 61 years old, and I talk to students all the time. I do not try to dress like them. I don't try to use their lingo. Meanwhile, thank you for arguing.
No, this isn't an argument. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. It's just contradiction. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. It is not.
That was great.
That guy and his videos are fantastic, and there are a lot of really good ones. I can't always find something that is appropriate for what I'm trying to teach at a time. And their book, his book, Thank You for Arguing, is what I use when I teach 3315, and I really recommend it. I had a funny situation once, well, not really funny, but I was having my nails done, and I was reading Thank You for Arguing, and while I was there, and this woman came up to me and said, "Oh, that is the best book I've ever read." And she said she was a lawyer, and that it significantly changed her life in terms of helping her understand what she was going to do. So I do highly recommend it, and this unknown lawyer woman at the nail salon also recommended it. Let me, so I've stopped screen sharing. Let's just go back to the end of the semester. Decide which one you're going to be working on, and again, start doing that. Realize that there will be a style quiz, and take a look at the schedule. I actually fixed the clock on my computer. So it is really 1:32 and not earlier than before. So I now have a clock that matches the real clock. Any questions? Okay, bye. Have a great week. Have a great weekend.
You too.